Hello and welcome back to the World Leader Leaderboard, the podcast where we rank every politician to tell you who's winning and losing each week. This week, I'm joined by Zach.
Hello.
And Nadja.
Hello.
How are we doing?
Yeah,
Very well.
Good. We've got some movement coming up. We're going to be moving some people up on our board, down on our board. This is how it looks at the moment. By the end of the episode, we'll have shuffled people around. We'll have some more winners, some more losers. And we have a brand new person being added to the board as selected by you, the audience. So stick around for that. In fact, not the only addition. We've also got someone being added by the team here too. So 2 new people. Spoilers, neither of them wearing hats, very disappointingly, in our photos of them on the board. But I'm sure we'll still have a nice time even without fun hats. Let's get straight into it though, and let's start with our winners this week. Zach, let's start with you. Who is your winner this week?
My winner of the week, and it's not very on brand, but I am moving up US President Donald Trump. We are recording this on Monday. This is the day after Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen just announced that the US and the EU have agreed. Everyone calls it a trade deal. I don't know. I think that's quite grandiose terminology. If like, I mean, we don't have a document, but most of like trade deals so far have been like 2 pages.
Yeah.
But they've agreed some sort of deal to avert a sort of full-scale trade war, which I think was very much on the cards if no deal had been agreed. I think this is a bit of a win for Trump, mainly just because the deal is so appallingly one-sided, right? So the way I think that the Europeans are trying to frame the deal is, look, in exchange for Trump drawing down his tariffs from the sort of threatened 30% level to 15%, which is where the sort of flat tariff is going to sit now, we have made a whole load of concessions to Trump, right? We have agreed to buy apparently $700 billion worth of American energy products, invest $600 billion into strategic industries in the US. It's not really clear what that means. And then I think Trump used some kind of phrase like massive amounts. We've agreed to buy massive amounts of American military kit, right? But, you know, I think if you told someone a year ago, this is what the trade is going to look like.
Yeah.
Trump's going to whack a 15% tariff, which by sort of recent historical standards is utterly unprecedented, especially in a trading relationship that deep. And instead of retaliating, the EU is going to give him hundreds of billions of dollars. You would be like, that's a pretty rubbish deal. And it is a pretty rubbish deal. But it's a pretty great deal from Trump's perspective. And I also think it comes off the back of a series of other deals which follow quite a similar pattern, right? Where basically what happens is Trump threatens an enormous tariff, ends up sort of conceding down to some slightly lower but still very high by historical standards tariff, and then the sort of other country makes a whole load of concessions as part of that negotiation. And I think, you know, that is a triumph from Trump's perspective. I think it's hard to deny that.
Okay, so that is Trump moving up from the negative section to just the lightly negative section. He's been bouncing around a lot, and I imagine we'll continue to, because as I expect we'll talk about in a second, we are coming up to when the tariffs are set to be reimposed on everyone, which is why obviously Europe is rushing to get this done. Why do you think Europe is acting like this? And is this something we can expect other trading partners to do as we get closer to the time? Is there just a general panic that like doing something, even if it is conceding massively, is better than these huge tariffs? Are we going to see other countries follow in Europe's stead, or is Europe just exceptionally bad at negotiating here?
Broadly speaking, there are 3 reasons that's classic TLDR. Isn't it? 3 reasons. I genuinely just think in these terms now. The first is that, and this has always been Trump's sort of basic assumption, but I think it has basically been born correct, or at least it looks like the rest of the world sees things in the same way. But his basic assumption has always been that basically deficit countries hold all the power in trade negotiations. Because, you know, and the US is the big deficit country, wants a massive trade deficit with basically all of its trading partners. All those trading partners rely on the American market to buy their stuff, right? And sure, tariffs mean that American consumers have to pay more, but Trump's sort of basic claim has always been that American consumers will be fine. They'll just buy American stuff instead. But European businesses and businesses in those surplus countries and amongst America's trading partners, they can't find an equivalent market, right? And to be fair, there aren't many equivalent markets. The American consumer market is incredibly strong. America has just a lot of wealthy people who like spending a lot of money in a way that basically no one else does. Although big caveat here is that the EU does have this. And so this is one of the reasons the EU probably could have done more to resist Trump. Anyway, that's the first reason, is this whole deficit surplus power imbalance that I think Trump believes in. I think apparently the Europeans also believe in. Europeans were very worried about losing their access to the American consumer market. The second thing is that the EU... the Commission itself doesn't have enough exclusive agency, right? It needs to coordinate its response. It needs to get sign-off from all the member states. And that makes things more difficult, right? And you saw that when the EU was trying to negotiate a preemptive retaliatory tariff package, right? In that it couldn't do anything too dramatic because it needed to agree on this retaliatory tariff package with all of its other members. And that's a thing that's specific to the EU. And the third reason is that I think the chaotic way in which Trump has sort of... fought his trade wars has made it harder, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, has made it harder for all of his trade victims to coordinate. I think in another universe, you could have seen coordination between, let's say, Japan, South Korea, and the EU to come up with a coordinated front against Trump's sort of trade wars. But that hasn't happened, in part because he's constantly flipping and flapping and U-turning, and flip-flopping is probably the turn of phrase I was looking for. And that, I just think that basically it's meant that those sort of other countries have failed to focus their political attention for consistently enough to coordinate, right? It sort of goes up domestic agenda and then down the domestic agenda. And that means that the sort of the Europeans 1 week are worried about it, and then the next week they're not so worried about it. The Japanese are worried about it 1 week, and then next week they're not so worried about it. And I think that's worked out really well for Trump. But yeah, I think those are the three reasons that I think the EU has done badly here. I think the one big caveat in all of this is China, right? I think basically every country has done badly in the trade negotiations, apart from maybe the UK. I think in some ways the UK deal looks quite good, but that does seem to be just because, I mean, one, we're not a surplus country. We're one of the very few countries where Americans buy more stuff from us than we buy from them. But also Trump just seems to really like Keir Starmer, and I don't really understand it, or maybe the royals, but he just does, and that means you get preferential treatment, which is nice, I guess. But the one country that has basically, I think, beaten the US in the trade war is China. And what I think is interesting is that no other country has drawn what I think is the correct lesson from the Chinese trade war, right? Which is that actually Trump talks a tough game, but his tolerance for economic pain is really quite limited, right? It was only a couple of days of high Chinese tariffs before Trump immediately signaled, I want a trade truce, right? China has more cards to play, right? Of course it does. The Americans rely way more on Chinese stuff than they do, let's say, German stuff, right? And China also has some very specific Trump cards, like rare earth metals, so it basically blockaded rare earth metals, and that was terrible for certain industries in the US. But I still think that there was a general lesson to be drawn there, right? Which is that actually Trump talks a big game, but his tolerance for economic pain is quite limited. And that's in some part a function of the fact that the American electorate is very sensitive to even mild economic pain, right? The amount of pushback and blowback Biden got for levels of inflation that were high by historical standards, but not by international standards, is proof of that American consumers just do not tolerate economic pain.
Well, it'll be interesting as we go into the weeks ahead how this plays out, because how many days do we have?
It's August 1st is the new deadline. So
when is this video coming out?
I mean, it'll be like a couple of days.
It'll be like that day.
But tomorrow? I reckon he won't get, he's got a whole lot more deals he needs to do. He probably just won't get them done, and it'll be delayed again, which is another reason it's so embarrassing from the EU's perspective, right? Is we fell for like the third deadline. I say we, I mean, I'm not even in the EU anymore, but I obviously identify more. The one thing I'll say is that looking forward, I think one of the big risks here for Europe, another reason I think this is such a bad deal, is I think Trump will infer from this that actually he can bully the Europeans into doing whatever he wants. We're not even a year into his first term, and Europe has already been, bullied in this trade deal. And I think also Trump will see his successful pressure campaign against NATO in similar terms, right? He'll think, actually, if I can get Mark Rutte to call me daddy and Ursula von der Leyen to commit to buying hundreds of billions of my things, I can do what I want with these guys.
I mean,
I think it'll be different for NATO, though. I think there's already been quite a few countries who've been like 5%. We're not meeting it. Because I guess it doesn't have that unified European kind of angle to it. Like it's each country looking out for its own national interest.
I think you're right, but I think that actually that cuts both ways. In that, like, I think both of these experiences, actually, I think the NATO and the trade deal, there's some really interesting parallels here. Both of these experiences show that you can actually mitigate the damage by sort of like tricking Trump a little bit, right? You say 5%, but actually, if you're Italy, you're including basically big bridges in your 5% because you're counting as military infrastructure. If you're the UK, you're including pension spending for service people in your 5%, right? There are things you can do to get away around it. Something similar to having the trade deals, right? Because it's the massive 600 billion figure that Trump keeps on talking about. He said the EU is going to invest 600 billion in the US. No one knows what it means. And I think the Europeans clearly think no one knows what it means, so we're just not going to do anything. But even though there are caveats, right, even though you can soften the blow by getting Trump on a technicality, I think the lesson that Trump will still learn is that if I bully you, you do what I want. And I still, there might come a point where he bullies you into something where you can't squeeze your way out on a technicality. And I think that's what the Europeans should be worried about.
Also, on the massive kind of spending on US military tech and all that kind of stuff, that's also pretty embarrassing for Europe too. Isn't that literally the opposite of what Europe wants right now? Like, Europe wants to invest in its militaries, and I suppose that does sometimes mean buying American. But all the talk about kind of European strategic independence, growing local industries, and improving our procurement.
Get me started.
And it's like, well, we're not improving our procurement and building in Germany. We're buying any old from America in order to spend a crazy amount of money.
And then one of the most depressing things about that, right, is that all the other big numbers, that we're going to spend 700 billion on American oil and gas or 600 billion invest in the US. That's probably private investment, right? That's private money. Like, people are buying oil and gas anyway. It doesn't really matter if you buy it from the US.
Sure.
The commitment to spend loads on American military kit really does. If I was a European, apparently I'm not, it would really hurt because not only is that stuff that probably, if you believe in strategic autonomy, you should be buying from European companies, but it's also public money, right? That's literally going to mean we raise taxes. The taxes go to, the government temporarily and then very quickly to American arms manufacturers. That's a terrible deal.
Yeah.
Oh, I think you should. Yeah. I mean,
but they're only getting a 15% tariff.
Yeah, exactly. It's appalling.
Oh, I'm surprised. I mean, we haven't got to the downs yet, but I think Europe as a continent is doing well that Trump's going up and they're not going down for this.
Von der Leyen, you're right, should actually be. I guess I could have moved her down. She's pretty low down.
Spoiler, she's not moving down, but Ursula, if you're watching, you better watch out because that bottom of the board is got your name on it. Okay, let's stick with the positives though. Nadja, let's move over to you. Who is your winner this week?
Yeah, so my winner of this week is a bit controversial and I need to caveat it quite a bit. But bear with me. It sounds pretty bad for him, but it's not, in my opinion, and I'm going to explain why. But my winner of the week is Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The reason essentially being is that last week there was a massive kind of political upheaval in Ukraine after he announced that he was signing a law to essentially reduce the autonomy and independence of these two main anti-corruption bodies. And that effectively they would be coming under government control, which of course takes away independence in one sense, but that also the prosecutor general, which is appointed by Zelensky, would essentially have the power to determine what cases are followed through, who deals with the cases, whether cases should be stopped or whatever. So it was a really big thing because many people, many Ukrainians, they saw it as essentially going against the whole point of these anti-corruption institutions, which are to take care of high-level graft, make sure that's not in government or whatever. And this was essentially seen as a kind of power grab move by Zelensky and by his administration. Okay, this all sounds really bad, but trust me, I'm getting to the point in a sec. And then on top of that, really quickly, just to add, coming up in the weeks following to that decision for these institutions to be reduced of a level of independence, a lot of kind of shifty things were going on. So one of, Zelensky's really close allies was being investigated for a land grab case. Around 70 raids were conducted by the Ukrainian security service of officials and workers of the anti-corruption agencies, and only, despite there being around 70 raids, only 2 were arrested for their links to Russia, actually. And which actually brings to my point. So loads of people went to the streets to protest. Zelensky, his justification for taking away, essentially putting the institutions under government control is that, firstly, they were vulnerable to Russian interference. And secondly, that they were ineffective, which is in some cases true. A recent report did conclude that these institutions aren't exactly the most effective in the world. Anyways, those were his two justifications. Nevertheless, people went out on the streets, mass protests, the biggest in Ukraine since the start of the war. Bear in mind, protesting when your country is at war, it's against martial law. So, that wasn't necessarily allowed. However, these protests were allowed to continue. There was no crackdown. Now, getting to my point why he's the winner of this week.
It's not sounding great so far.
I know.
I've got to be
bear
honest.
with me. I just bear with me. These protests were essentially allowed to continue for 3 days. And after 3 days, Zelensky came out with a second bill saying, we've listened to you. We've listened to the Ukrainian people. I'm introducing a new bill that overrules the previous one. So essentially, he's come out to say, I was wrong. There was supposed to be communication about this, the level of which things went through in which the law was introduced. It's not fair. Listening to the people, we're reversing it. In my opinion, a lot of Western media, mainstream media, hasn't portrayed it in this way. They've kind of portrayed it as, his reputation has been tainted by this whole situation, and it's been described as a kind of power grab kind of thing. But I don't know. I see it as a way of kind of reinforcing these kind of democratic institutions and values that if people go out on the streets and are protesting, there was no crackdown. The administration listened to these things. Yes, some people say that it was kind of, a last minute resort because he didn't realize so much backlash would happen. But at the same time, you're listening to the will of the people. And what's really important here is that the protesters have explicitly said they're not against Zelensky. They're against the bill. Zelensky's approval ratings are still pretty solid. People are generally happy with him in Ukraine. So I guess this does kind of, he's my winner of this week for these reasons, that he's managed to solve a political crisis really quickly, even though he caused it. But still, that shows a sense of leadership.
Sure.
That's why he's moving up. I don't know if you buy into my argument.
No, I think it's good. You condensed it quite nicely at the end. He's survived and solved a political crisis.
Yeah, Zelensky moves then from the positive section to the very top of the board, joining the 5 other rose gallery faces up there at the top. Zach, I am interested in your thoughts because Nadia basically said it's a kind of contentious argument potentially. It's got all of the negatives leading up to the kind of positive solution and positive outlook. And as you've said, people might not necessarily agree. Zach, what's your take on this? Do you agree? Is Zelensky a winner this week, do you think?
I am. I think the political crisis probably ended pretty well for him. I mean, relative to what you might have expected a week ago, when there were, not silly reports suggesting he might be pushed out. But I think actually, one of the reasons I am very sympathetic to the basic idea that Zelensky should be moving up is that I think if you zoom out a bit, things are going pretty great for him. And we have talked about this in another podcast, but I do think the fact that Trump has basically thrown his weight behind the Ukrainians, and I can't remember if it was Kellogg or JD Vance, but one of them gave an interview a couple of days ago where they said, we have to change our strategy with the Russians. And Keith Kellogg, by the way, is basically Trump's guy in Ukraine. And he is spending a lot of time in Ukraine. I mean, basically lots of Trump's team like Witkoff and co, they sort of like jet off to Israel for a day, then come back. They don't really like spending too much time outside the US. But Keith Kellogg has been basically in Ukraine constantly for the past 2 weeks. And when that's happening, that the relationship is good.
Yeah.
And I think, from Zelensky's point of view, it's not only do you still have the American support, but as we talked about a moment ago, the Europeans have decided to increase defense spending to 5%. That should ultimately provide a bit more support for Ukraine. I think they've managed to finance now a few Patriot missiles as well. There was that Mertz thing, wasn't there? Yeah.
So,
it is generally looking optimistic, and as you say, it is a positive outcome from the crisis, certainly, and hopefully, from his perspective at least, he is able to maintain that, keep his top spot at the top of the board in the weeks ahead. The polling, as you say, looking good. Let us know in the comments if you disagree, but I think
probably there will be some disagreements. But that's okay.
But I think it's a fun.
It's okay to disagree.
It's fun to have one like this because you're right. it's not all black and white. It's not that everyone's doing well or doing badly. And I can totally see where you're coming from. I think you made a compelling case. So we'll see what the audience thinks. Speaking of the audience, in a moment, we will be adding someone to the board based on your suggestions. But first, I have 4 very quick announcements about our magazine, Too Long. And these are announcements. This isn't just a sales pitch. So if you're interested in what we're up to, then stick around for a moment. The first announcement is that our current issue, The End of the American Order, is fully in stock now, which means that previously you were pre-ordering it, but it published last week. So any orders that you submit now will immediately be shipped. So if you buy a physical copy, we'll get it in the mail to you as quick as possible. And if you buy a digital copy, it will land in your inbox essentially immediately. So if you've been holding out and if you've been waiting to pick up a copy, now's your time. You don't even need to wait. You can have it emailed to you straight away. So that's the latest issue. The second thing worth noting is very regularly we talk about the fact that you can get a 20% discount if you subscribe to the magazine. That's often the way you get the best deal, is by subscribing to Too Long. You will only be able to subscribe to this issue for a couple more weeks. We'll soon be rotating it out, so new subscribers, the first issue they get will be the December one rather than this summer issue. So if you want to make sure you subscribe and get a copy of the latest issue rather than having to wait for your first issue to arrive in December, then you've only got a couple more weeks. So if you want to get the best deal, if you do want to get that subscriber benefit, then now is probably one of your last chances. Next, my third announcement is we have added some bundles to the store to save you some money. So if you want to pick up a copy of the current issue plus a copy of Too Long 4, The Most Influential Person, then you can buy both of them together for $17.99. They should be about £27 for both, but you can get both for $17.99 if you buy them together, which isn't far off getting the 4th copy basically free. It's like a few quid. So if you'd like both, you can grab the bundle now. And I would say this issue, the one that came out this spring, still holds up very well. And I think if you're interested in how we ranked people, if you're interested in who the most influential people in the world are, that section still holds up very well. And it's interesting to see how that list looks. And you might say, well, some of these people shouldn't be as high anymore.
The
Pope, he is dead. But there is a new Pope. Sorry if you didn't know that already. I hate to announce it this way in the middle of a pitch, but the Pope is dead.
Sorry.
Breaking news.
But yeah, this magazine is still very interesting, and you get this one for $17.99. Or if you want to go even crazier, for $39.99, you can buy the bundle of every issue we've ever made, all 5 of them. That should be about £65. That's a huge discount, down to $40. And you might think, who's going to want all 5 issues? But a lot of people do go back and buy old copies. So if you're a collector too, if you want all of them, I can't guarantee this bundle will exist forever. And it does save you on buying every issue individually, like a lot of people have been. So the bundles are there. You can grab the 2, the 5 bundle. You can still subscribe. And if you buy the digital edition, you get it immediately. Those are my 4 announcements. Let's move on. Oh, the link to this store is in the description. Let's move on. Okay, so let's move on to the audience suggestion for this week. As always, in the previous episode, you're able to comment people you'd like to see us add to the board or move on the board. And whoever the top comment is the person we do it with. This week, it is the president of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, Ilham Aliyev. Do we think he is a winner or a loser this week? I'm going to start with Nadja, and then I'll come over to Zach to hear your thoughts. Winner or loser?
I think he is a winner, not just because of this week for anything specific, although I do have something to say for this week, but the last few, not months, but years, I think he's been a bit of a winner. 3 reasons why.
Classic. We love it.
3 reasons why. Firstly, the first reason, and probably the biggest reason why Aliyev is coming out as a winner, is just the waning influence of Vladimir Putin in the general region of the Caucasus. If you've not been aware, obviously there's been a war going on the complete other front of Russia, with Ukraine, and essentially all of Putin's kind of capacities and all of his attention has been on that front, on winning that war specifically. It's a really very different geopolitical reality to maybe 20 years ago, when wars were still being waged in the Caucasus by Putin and there was still a push for separatism. All of that has died down quite a bit. And in general, Russia's influence in that region has been waning. It is in part because, and actually this kind of comes to my second reason, so I'm just going to put those two together right now. It is in part because Azerbaijan's military successes have just been quite big, very well. In 2020, Azerbaijan had a really big success with the whole Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And since then, he's been receiving a lot of support from Turkey in training the Azerbaijani military. So it's becoming, Azerbaijan as a military force is becoming, very strong in the area in general. But another reason why is that Turkey has been stepping up its influence in the region as well, which has contributed to Russia's waning and Russia's kind of pushing back away from that area. And because of these kind of dynamics, like these geopolitical changes that are being played out, Aliyev has kind of put himself in a situation where he's kind of, and we've seen this in the recent week, where he's kind of pushing Putin a bit to see how much like influence or like how far Moscow can go. But what I mean by that is, like, he said in the past month that Azerbaijan, which, if I've not mentioned already, was a long time an ally of Moscow, supports Ukraine's territorial integrity. There was also more recently an announcement by the president that he would be suing Russia for a plane crash that happened as well a few weeks ago. 38 people died. So he's kind of like, he's testing Putin and he's testing the boundaries of Putin's influence in that region, which I think is obviously, it's good for Aliyev as a leader of the Caucasus going forward. And then in general, Azerbaijan, putting aside the whole waning of Russia's influence, its growing military capacity, it has just become an energy giant as well. And he's been allowed to specifically get away with a lot. So he does have some autocratic tendencies. But Europe, which is like a big buyer of Azerbaijani energy, because essentially doesn't want to buy Russia's energy, has been kind of just brushing that under the carpet. And this is a common pattern we've been seeing in the EU recently. So he's just been kind of being allowed to get away with kind of what he wants and not get too much international criticism, which is, good for him. And I don't think I broke down my 3 reasons why very sufficiently there, but that's why he's a winner for this week.
Zach?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that the other thing to say is, the last thing I'll say is that as well as Russia's waning power and influence in the region, which has created the space for Aliyev to be a bit more assertive, especially when it comes to Armenia. It's also worth noting, I think, in the past couple of weeks, Iran's waning influence in the region, right? So Armenia's sort of 2 security guarantors were sort of Russia, although Russia was sort of split in its alliances between Azerbaijan and Armenia. But Iran has long been sort of Armenia's closest like cultural ally in lots of ways. And the fact that Iran, I think not just that it doesn't have the sort of capacity to sort of extend support to sort of its allies abroad, but also that I don't really think it's interested at the moment. It was at a point, but I think the Iranians are just very much focused on sort of solidifying power domestically. That's bad. I mean, that's bad news for Armenia and thus good news for Azerbaijan. And I think you can sort of see quite how much Iranian influence has waned by the fact that over the past couple of weeks, there have been a number of reports that Aliyev has actually invited Trump in to sort out some of the last remaining, but I was going to say tensions, but like basically the last sort of like question marks on this Armenia-Azerbaijan peace deal that's been going on for a while. And so he's basically invited the US in to monitor this thing called the Zangezur corridor, which is this thing that connects the sort of 2 parts of, is it Armenia or is it
Nagorno-Karabakh, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think it's the 2 parts of, I can't remember one. It's 2 parts of Azerbaijan or Armenia. No, 2 parts of Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
And it runs along the southern border of Armenia.
Yeah.
And he's invited the US, and Trump has apparently suggested a sort of private military company guaranteeing security along there. And that, I mean, imagine, the Iranians would never have accepted that a couple of years ago, but now they can't really say anything about it.
Well, sounds like he's having a pretty good time. Thank you, Nadia, for that extensive rundown. What?
It just sounded sassy.
No. We got years worth of history there. That was great. There's more than 3 reasons. And for all of those reasons and more, Aliyev is moving up on our board, will be added to the board in the likely positive section, where he will sit until we next discuss Azerbaijan. Who knows when that will be. Let us know in the comments who you want to see us add or move next week, and whatever the top voted comment is, within reason, will be added or moved on the board in the next episode. But now, let's continue with our additions, and let's move to our losers this week. Zach, let's start with you. Who is your loser this week?
My loser of the week is Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te. And this is essentially because, well, it's not really a very good TLDR. It's slightly longer than usual. But basically, over the past couple of months, civil society groups inside Taiwan have organized to what are called recall petitions against MPs from the sort of pro-China opposition party, the Kuomintang or KMT. And these sort of civil society groups are annoyed both at the fact that the KMT is quite pro-China in lots of ways. And I think sort of the optics have been pretty terrible for the KMT recently. Lots of the lawmakers have been paying regular visits to Beijing. But also because there's this sort of gridlock where you've got the Lai Ching-te, who's from the main party, the Democratic Progressive Party or DPP. He's in the presidency, but the legislature is it's not controlled by any single party, but the KMT and then another smaller opposition party have a sort of functioning majority, right? So they can block all of the DPP's legislative agenda. And anyway, Lai Ching-te would have been hoping that these recall elections would have been successful. And if they had been successful, they happened on Saturday. If they had been successful, they might have broken this sort of deadlock between the executive and the legislature. They were not. There were 24 held on Saturday, and all of them failed, and by some pretty big margins. So that means that not only has, and this originally the effort was organized by civil society groups and not the DPP, but they threw their weight behind it towards the end. But yeah, so that in that sense, it's a political loss for the DPP. And it also means that Lai Ching-te now just has another 4 years of political deadlock that doesn't seem to be resolved anytime soon. And I say deadlock, but actually over the past like 18 months or so, the KMT has sort of won, right? It's been able to sort of force through certain pieces of legislation and basically obstruct all of the DPP's own legislative agenda. So I think that's pretty rubbish for him. And I think it sort of compounds some pre-existing rubbishness in that I think in general, polling suggests that Taiwanese attitudes towards mainland China are souring and have been for many years. But I do think that in general, lots of sort of moderate Taiwanese voters aren't particularly convinced by how the DPP have handled the China issue. I think in large part because, the DPP's sort of position has been to sort of, increases in defense spending, buddy up to the US, make sure that China wouldn't dare invade. And then, that sort of gives them the space, apparently, to say things that might upset China and talk about how Taiwan is already an independent country, for instance.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that Trump is not an enthusiastic supporter of Taiwan has put some strain on that policy, right? In that, like, all of a sudden, some of the slightly more, I don't know, aggressive is not the right word, but like slightly more pro-independence rhetoric that you see coming from the DPP looks maybe a little bit naive when Trump all of a sudden turns around and says, I don't really want, he has signaled on multiple occasions he doesn't really want to support Taiwan and has actually attacked them for like stealing his chip business, right? So I just think that like quite a lot of the DPP's positioning relies implicitly on American support, and the fact that American support is definitely not guaranteed at the moment leaves them a little bit vulnerable.
Well, there's a new addition to the board, Lai Ching-te, and in the negative section, for the various reasons you've outlined, it does sound like he's got a pretty tough road ahead legislatively. I mean, 4 more years, did you say? When did he enter power? The
start of 2024, and I'm pretty sure it's 4-year terms, actually, I guess. So he's more like 3 years left.
Even still.
No, it's tough. And it's hard to overstate, right, how bad the gridlock has been. It's not just been like the majority, they're blocking his policies. The KMT have also passed new policies that give the legislature more power. And then other policies which basically render the judiciary less powerful, right? So it's not just that there's this gridlock, it's also that the KMT have been able to use that gridlock to sort of increase, to shift the balance of power towards them. So pretty rubbish for him. Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's move on to you, Nadja. Who is your
Don't worry,
loser this week?
I'll talk a lot about this
Yeah,
one.
this is your favourite.
I'm joking. My loser of this week is serving President Alexander Vucic. Main reason being he's been having a tough time again recently. He has been for the past 8 months, but because of ongoing anti-government protests. But more recently, just last week actually, a new wave of protests have resurfaced, and these are the Rio Tinto protests. So context for that is essentially Vucic signed a deal with Rio Tinto, which is a massive lithium mining conglomerate. I think it's an Australian company, to allow them to mine lithium in one of Serbia's eastern regions. It's called the Jadar Valley. And it's basically, it's untouched and it's in like pristine condition, and he's allowed this company, Rio Tinto, to go there. I think it's like, I can't remember how much the deal is. It's like 40. No, I'm not going to say a number because it's the wrong number. But it's a very expensive deal, and it's really good for the EU because it's been looking for lithium minerals and other kind of critical minerals to help revamp its green transition. And lithium's it's quite key for battery production and especially for EVs, so electric vehicles. So the EU is very keen that deal goes through. Unfortunately, the Serb population are very not keen for the deal to go through. So in 2021, when the deal was actually announced, there were mass protests against it because for humane ecological reasons, and saying it's undemocratic. Nobody wants this to go on. The deal was scrapped in 2022 because of this backlash. Last year, it was re-announced again, and things died down for a bit for Vucic. There weren't too many protests. And then a tragedy happened in last November when a canopy of a train station collapsed, killing like 16 people. And then since then, it's been loads of protests. And now he's got this new wave coming up again. So it's not great for him. One more thing I want to talk about with Vucic is that in the last few months, there's been a lot of talk about whether is he going to finally be ready to step down? Is this the end of him? Whatever. A key reason why Vucic has been able to hold power for so long is that the protests which have been organized by the students they never really kind of had a specific agenda, or they never explicitly said they want to go to snap elections. They were very much focused on anti-corruption and reforms and transparency. In the last month, they've come out and changed their demands because essentially none of them have been fulfilled, saying, no, we want snap elections. This is a big U-turn. This wasn't in their previous manifesto before this. They've announced that. And a recent poll shows that there's a lot of support for their demands for a snap election. A lot more support now than previously for. And there were 2 municipal elections that happened, I think early last month, where Vucic's party, the SNS, where they normally receive around 80% or more of the vote, they fell. Like they still won, but it was like by 50% margin. Now, those are the first elections held since the whole protest began. So it's not looking good for him. And there's now pressure for him to listen to the students and call these snap elections. But a lot of people are saying that's not going to happen. He knows that it's very likely now that he won't get a majority.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, things aren't going in a good direction for him. So he's my loser of this week.
Sounds like a bit of a disaster.
It's a bit of a disaster, yeah.
Vucic then moving down from the negative to right at the bottom of the board, getting crowded down there. Got quite a few people at the bottom at the moment.
I've got a question.
Yeah. Sorry,
Open.
you have a question?
Yeah, is that all right?
Yeah, you can ask a question.
Is that all right?
No, ask your question.
So sometimes you see polls of Vucic versus like the student bloc. And I mean, the polls, some of the ones I've seen suggest that he would lose. But what actually are apart from anti-corruption, are there like consistent politics that the student bloc like have an actual politics? Because I remember reading your scripts about it. Isn't that those protests? It wasn't just students. It ended up being sort of everyone from like students, farmers, and then opposition figures. Do they have like a political platform, or is it just?
This is a really good question, and it's one of the main reasons why people are skeptical of these protests and skeptical of Vucic's eventual downfall is that they don't have a specific politics. Their kind of stance, I would describe, is like, we don't care who's in power as long as these institutions are functioning properly, as long as courts do their jobs, as long as elections aren't won by vote buying. And that's a problem. It's a problem because aside from the student bloc, you've got a variety of opposition parties who are very much ready to take on that bloc and like capture it for themselves and, push a certain type of politics, whether it's a nationalist politics, whether it's Eurosceptic or pro-European. Right now, the coalition, the bloc, is a mix of opinions. Like if you look at protest photos from in Serbia, you'll see people, like, there's mostly Serbian flags, but in occasions you'll see people holding up European flags, and then you'll see people holding up Kosovo, Serbia flags, in the sense that it's a massive like political divide and that's a problem, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to counter Vucic with a certain politics. And this is the way we want the country to go, and be specific about it. And on top of that, they don't even have a candidate right now, a viable candidate that can kind of go against Vucic. They've released an agenda, so the candidate can't be part of the opposition, can't be a student, can't be part of the ruling party. But even so,
there's lots of things you don't want. I'm not really clear on what you do want.
Yeah, so that's a problem. Nevertheless,
Are you optimistic? Well, I'm not optimistic, but as in, do you think they will actually succeed, or do you think Vucic will hang on?
I think he'll hang on. I will think he'll hang on. And I think Georgina asked me this when I came back from holiday, like the same question, and I said to her, I think it's a positive thing that civil society in general is kind of re-emerging and it's being a lot more active in the political sphere. For a long time, it was kind of seen as politics, it's all rigged anyways, so there's no point in doing anything, nothing's going to change. But there is a kind of sense that things are changing. People are being more active in the political sphere, which is only a positive thing. Like that's democracy, I guess, which is good.
Yeah. Also, I mean, in the best case scenario, even if Vucic does hang on, if you do get, you're right. I think it's important for the healthy function of a democracy to have an active civil society.
Yeah.
And also, ideally, you sort of pressure Vucic into, or whoever's in power, into sort of cleaning up the institutions, removing corruption, and then you can let normal politics sort of resume, right? Where politics doesn't have to be sort of split along the pro-corruption, anti-corruption lines, and it's more about ideology in those.
Yeah, and that sounds like if those are the objectives of most of the protesters anyway, or the only unifying objectives are to clean up democracy, anti-corruption, those kinds of things, then those are the kinds of things he could be pressured into more easily than like solid policy platforms, potentially. Exactly. Like he's not going to compromise on politics, but whether he can on those other things, or might be forced to.
We'll see.
Well, I think just end on a note of pessimism.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, the international experience does suggest that though normally those sort of like broad-based anti-corruption movements really struggle when like elections near, because then you sort of do have to say something about your ideology, and you get in a bit of a tiz-was about it. And I think the experience in Hungary suggests that sometimes combining anti-corruption politics with actually a particular sort of position on the usual issues can be is probably electorally optimal, I think. Yeah,
that's such a good point. Yeah.
How long do we have until the elections, if they're called ordinarily? Do you know?
I mean, 2027.
Okay.
Which isn't that far away. It sounds like miles away, but that's like...
We're halfway through 2025.
Yeah.
Time,
it's August next
time
week,
rattles
Jesus.
on. It's crazy.
It's quite scary.
It's August this week.
How old is Margaret now? She's
18 months, pretty scary.
18 years.
18.
She's going to college. No.
It's crazy. Okay, so Vucic moving down to the bottom of the board then. He's got a couple years to pull it back maybe, but right now...
We'll be talking about him for a long time.
I can't wait.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let's move on to our final section of the show, our ultimate winners and losers of the week. Okay, so the way that this works is each of us now gets the opportunity to vote for one of the winners or one of the losers to be the ultimate winner and loser of the week. If we reach a consensus on who the ultimate winner is or the ultimate loser is, then that person moves an additional space. So if they're a winner, they move up one more spot, and if they're a loser, they move down one more spot. We need consensus to get a movement though, so let's vote on winners first and write down our ultimate winners this week. Your options are Donald Trump, Zelensky, or Aliyev as the audience suggestion. Zach, let's start with you. Who is your ultimate winner this week?
I'm going for the headline grabbing Donald Trump. I feel a bit weird that we haven't really talked about the Epstein stuff on the podcast.
No.
It just sort of escaped us on the news cycle. But I think actually the deals recently have been pretty unequivocally great for him. And I do think that he has defied expectations, especially, serious expectations. Maybe MAGA would have expected this, but I think most people thought.
Yes, that's fair.
Yeah.
Donald Trump as well.
Whoa.
And a bottle of orange there as well.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll appreciate that.
Disgracefully partisan.
I also voted Donald Trump, which means Trump moves up an additional spot. He is moving from, he originally started this episode in the fully negative, then moved to lightly negative, and now is just dead in the middle of the board. As we say, though, we've got a bunch more tariff stuff potentially coming up in the days ahead. There's obviously the Epstein stuff too, so that could, it's already a pretty big factor in MAGA politics, but could continue to boil over. So maybe he won't stay in the middle for long, but he's returned to neutral, which for Trump on this board is not necessarily a bad thing. Let's move on to the bad things, though. Our losers this week. Your options are Lai Ching-te or Vucic. And Zach, let's start with you again. Your ultimate loser of the week.
I've gone for poor old Vucic because I just don't think he can catch a break at the moment.
Not with Madja on his back.
No, she's just taking him down every time she's here.
I went for Lai Ching-te, I think.
That's very polite of us.
Yeah. But pretty bad results. So,
Yeah, I also went Lai Ching-te. I think losing every single recall being stuck for years longer with your power being slowly siphoned away by the opposition in the legislature is just a bit embarrassing.
Yeah, so my one caveat, the reason I didn't think it was unequivocally bad is that it wasn't actually a DPP organised thing, right? Like
they did back it though.
Yeah, only at the very
bad
end.
optics.
So.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it wasn't unequivocally bad. I mean, he's still in a tough spot.
Yeah. I mean, so is Vucic.
Yeah, there you
Everyone's in tough spots.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, join us again next week for more winners, more losers, more boards, more movement, and probably more Vucic.
Yes.
Depends if you're on the episode.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed for more Vucic.
I have to prepare.
We will see you again next week.